Hello and welcome on www.ThePapare.com, Sri Lanka's #1 sports hub. You're joining with the last dance of the last dance. That's how we would like to with the final two episodes of The Last Dance, the review documentary series that covers the career of Michael Jordan and the 97-98, mainly the 97-98 championship run of Chicago Bulls was released last actually during this week. So we are here to review the final two episodes as we promised last week. So that's why we are terming it as the last dance of the last dance. And to move on to the questions today, we've made a little change on the panel again this week as well. This time we have double trouble coming in your way. We have another lady joining in together with Tahira. So let's take a look at the panel who's going to join with us today to discuss these two episodes. There you go. Tahira Kutilan and S.L. Vasudevan, our very own editorial manager from ThePapare.com, is also joining with us this week to discuss the final two episodes of The Last Dance. And of course, Shanak Amarasinghe joining with us for the third week on the show. Welcome to all our guests who are joining with us. And before we move on to the big questions, the favorite question that we ask every new guest in the show, I'll move on to Estelle. How did you get to know about the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan? How did you embrace this fame?
Hi guys, hi everyone watching. Growing up in the 90s, like in the 98 season, I was 9 years old. So to be honest, by that time I had not seen Michael Jordan play. I had not seen the Bulls in a game. But my only exposure came through at that time as they portrayed so well in the documentary. Michael was larger than life, right? And he was everywhere. It was not just the basketball court. So one of my earliest memories, I would say, is he was in one of Michael Jackson's music videos called Jam. So that was kind of my first viewing, that's what I can remember of him. I think watching him play came much later. So which at the time, this international sport was mostly through magazines and little snippets on TV. But of course, he's that larger-than-life persona shone through. And of course, Space Jam came. Then that was a huge hit. And also, guys like Dennis Rodman, I remember, because he had the flashy hair. So yeah, it wasn't necessarily he's playing or they're playing, but that whole persona out of the court that really reached us.
Well, there you go. We've shown you quite a few angles on how actually is Michael Jordan and Chicago Bulls fame reached Sri Lanka throughout our first episode. If you haven't watched those, sincerely remind you can watch them on our YouTube channel. They're uploaded on Facebook and on our website as well. Okay, let's get into business. The 9th and 10th episode, the season finale of this documentary. I'll first move on to Shanaka. Steve Kerr and Michael Jordan, two characters that's discussed in the 9th and the 10th episode. Shanaka, a lot of connections between them personally, starting from their fathers on how they were tragically murdered. Then second, on how Steve Kerr found his place in the team after Paxson, and how both Paxson and Steve Kerr were offered game-winning shots to win two championships in two different times. Then Steve Kerr moving on to coach GSW at this particular era, then going on to break that winning record that was set by Chicago Bulls earlier. So a lot of similarities between these two. My question is, do you think Steve Kerr is following up with what he learned during that greatest era of basketball?
I think there's no question that Steve Kerr is definitely taking a lot from that period with Michael Jordan and the Bulls into his coaching career, and I think it propelled him into being the coach he is and also being the human being he is. I think he went through a lot in that time. As he said, he came in as kind of a replacement and understudy to John Paxson when Paxson was on his way out at the end of his career. And again, what he pointed out was that Jordan really needed to trust you. And if you remember in a couple of the previous episodes, he said that there was a punch-up between him and Michael Jordan, and that kind of cemented their relationships after Jordan apologized. So I think that through that whole situation, Jordan managed to get the trust, or Steve Kerr managed to get the trust of Michael Jordan, and he was shooting well in practice, so he knew he could hit them from where he needed them to be hit. And when talking about that game-winning shot that Steve Kerr actually hit, you can't go back. You can't talk about that shot without going back to the game previously, where John Stockton had come in and actually stolen the ball from Michael Jordan on the same play. And when Stockton comes in, he leaves his man Steve Kerr wide open if he comes into double team. And they had planned on that, and that's why Steve Kerr told him, and that was a great conversation on the bench, and that's what I really live for, to hear what these guys are talking about at the bench with the coaches and the players. And Steve Kerr said, if he comes off me, I'm going to be ready, just pass it out, I'll take the shot. And that's exactly what happened. So John Stockton left his man, tried to come in for the steal, and Steve Kerr took the shot that won them for that particular game. So I think it was really a question of trust being built among the two players at that point. But like you said, similarities between the players in terms of the fact that they've lost their fathers. But I think that was little maybe hyped up during the making of the documentary, because it was never a conversation that they had during the time that they were playing. And I don't think, I'm maybe a little bit cynical here, but I think that the fact that Steve Kerr is the coach of the Golden State Warriors, who are now the best placed team on as far as a regular season record goes, with the 73-9, I think you can't escape the fact that the NBA have given him a little bit more airtime, made Steve Kerr a bigger deal perhaps than he was on the Bulls, because of his personality now as the coach of their best performing team.
Let's move on to Tahira. Now, there were a lot of players, Tahira, who actually challenged Michael Jordan during this stint he played. And at the start of the 9th and the 10th episode, a lot of facts are spoken about Reggie Miller, a player who took Michael Jordan right off to the edge at that particular Eastern Conference Finals. Then during the 97 and the 98 Finals, we have Karl Malone from the Utah Jazz, who also challenged Michael in a certain way. Then there is another factor that is discussed. Michael was sometimes sick while he was playing these games, but he was tired physically and mentally. But he managed to pull these things through, together with his sickness, together with his tiredness in terms of physicality and mentality, and then also the pressure from these other players who challenged him. The question is your thoughts on how he actually pulled these things off and how he managed to win this championship with all this drama happening around him.
Yes, so the series starts off with a scene where Michael Jordan is in a fist fight, and also coming to Reggie Miller. I'll start off from there. So he describes their relationship as a very unique relationship. So at the start, we kind of thought, okay, fine, he is a threat, given how like he's younger, he can shoot over anybody from any point, from anywhere, which did kind of question, will this pose a threat to the Chicago Bulls, especially during Game 3 and 4. Also, there was so much like tension between the two teams, and given how the Pacers were much more tougher, as most of the Chicago Bulls team players also kind of mentioned, they were tougher, they were more physical, which did take a toll on the Bulls. So that ideally did question how the Bulls might perform when watching the series this is. And then in the end, them pulling through all of that, and also the fact that they had advantage to their side, given how they were more experienced compared to the Indiana Pacers, also came into like an advantage to them. So that was one thing we can get out of that. Although Reggie Miller did have a lot of, let's say, he highlights the fact that Michael Jordan kind of trash talked him. Also, there was words exchange, punches exchange. Still, all of that rivalry was mostly on the court, but off the court, they were quite nice to each other. Then moving on to, let's say, the Eastern Conference Finals, there was so much intensity in terms of the game, the atmosphere within the arena, also the pressure and all of that came towards Michael Jordan from the media as well, which would have ideally affected his game, but then again, he didn't let it. So that is quite admirable how he tackled all of the situations and ended up, being on top of his game throughout. Moving on to Utah Jazz Finals, where that team was prepared for the Bulls. They were mentally prepared, very prepared, and the Bulls did not see this coming. But at the same time, Michael Jordan falling sick prior to one of the games as a result of food poisoning. His mother questioned him playing. The media and the press, as well as his own teammates, questioned his physical condition, whether he was fit enough to play, and their concerns about how he's going to perform, which did kind of show at the start of the game, given how he wasn't performing as well as he usually does, given how he was sick. But then again, his inborn desire to win at all costs, even if it meant that he had to do it on his own, was quite inspiring, given how he did overperform even then. Then, in addition to that, there were also commentaries kind of passed his way, saying that he was out of gas, that he didn't have it in him to finish off. Would he come out of this as with a big finish or not? Those are all questions that kind of were thrown at him, but he never disappointed by the end of the day. Despite the tough competition and the physical and mental toll it took on him, regardless of the circumstances, he still pulled through. And that was the beauty of it, and us as sportsmen and women can learn a lot out of it.
The two other personalities that we need to discuss in this review in the 9th and the 10th episodes is Dennis Rodman and Scottie Pippen. Our second episode of the review was totally dedicated to Dennis Rodman, but I think it would be a mistake if we don't discuss about Dennis Rodman and Scottie Pippen a bit in these two episodes as well. There were two alarming factors. Dennis Rodman leaving the practice in the middle of the run for finals, and then Scottie Pippen starting the 97-98 regular season with a contract issue, and then he actually misses the first phase of the season. He comes back to the team in the second, and then again in the finals he plays with a back injury, but he comes back and he does his job in the flow. So a lot of factors to discuss about. Estelle, your thoughts on these two personalities, Dennis Rodman and his professionalism, and how Scottie Pippen pulled it through to the finals with all the difficulties.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Dennis Rodman, I think, first of all, there's a lot to be said about Phil Jackson's man management skills in this case. Because looking from outside, think of a man like Dennis Rodman, okay? In the middle of a final series, he's off wrestling? That doesn't scream professional to you or me either. But I mean, if you listen to what Michael and Phil had to say about him, they always emphasize on the fact that he was the perfect professional on the court. I think that is one key fact that we need to take from this, is that at the end of the day, his teammates trusted him to do the job on the court because they saw what he did outside. They saw what he did in practice. They saw what type of person he was. And guys in the leadership group, Phil Jackson, Michael, understood what gets prepared is not so in that aspect. A lot of leadership in that way as well. And coming to Scottie Pippen, if I'm being completely honest with you, The Last Dance gave me a huge appreciation of Scottie that I didn't have before, because you kind of have to empathize with a guy who was in his own right a phenomenal player, right? He was one of the best in the league at that point, but he ended up in the team with the best player in the planet. So he was always in the shadow, and even when Michael was not there, suddenly you saw in that season where Michael wasn't playing, although Scottie led, that game-winning shot he wasn't given. And I mean that whole controversy with him sitting out those final few seconds and all of that, to me, I really kind of empathize with him because he was a good player, and it's almost like he didn't get the respect that he maybe deserved. And if truth be told, I don't think Michael Jordan could have been the player he was if Scottie Pippen was not in that team. Because even once they win their sixth title, when at the parade, when they're speaking, both Michael and Phil say that this this would not have been possible without those two players. I know we talk about them. I know when you talk about the Bulls of that era, you talk about Michael, Scottie, and Dennis. But it really, the documentary itself, I think, gave me a huge appreciation of particularly what Scottie Pippen did on the court and what an influence he was around the team as well.
Well, we'll move on to the most interesting questions. I think in the last episode I did mention we'll try and take an attempt to look back at the entire docu-series as a whole and probably debate the most interesting factor whether Michael Jordan is the greatest player of all time. So I'll first move on to Shanaka in that case. It's an open question to have a crack at for all three guests. Shanaka first. Now, is Michael Jordan the greatest player of all time? And your views on the docu-series as a whole. But let me throw in a little point for that opinion piece of yours. I would like you to start by that final phase of play, the final 1 minute of play in that 98 finals against the Utah Jazz, the sixth championship of Chicago Bulls, because that is supposed to be one of the best plays that you would see in any sport, because it was so competitive, it was so unpredictable, and it turned out in favor of Chicago Bulls. I'd like you to start from there and go on to debate whether Michael Jordan is the greatest player of all time and your views on the document series as a
Unquestionably, I think so. Perhaps I'm biased because, like we were speaking off air, I'm probably the only one who, out of all of you guys, who actually saw him play in real time. So even when we are watching the flashbacks, we're kind of on the edge of our seats, even though we know what happened. So at the time that we were watching it back then, we didn't know what happened. We were actually watching it unfold before our eyes. So he just was phenomenal. And I think it was more than anything else. I think there were better shooters than him. I think Reggie Miller himself was a better shooter than him. There are big men who have been more dominant in the game, guys like Shaq, guys like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. There have been better passers in the game who have been like Magic Johnson, John Stockton. But in terms of combinations and just sheer willpower, I don't think there's anybody else who could play the all-round game as well as he can. The only comparison really remains is whether LeBron James is the best player in the history of basketball or whether it was Michael Jordan. I think that's the only fair debate to be had. And let's not forget that LeBron James is 6'10" and Michael Jordan was 6'6". And in the NBA, that means pretty much everything. And also Michael Jordan has won 6 championships, whereas LeBron has won 1, despite being in the finals several times. And I think the NBA was probably a little bit more, not a little bit more, it was quite a bit more competitive back in that time in the 90s. You had different eras happening. You had the Lakers, you had the Pistons, you had the Cavs who were good. And then half the way through Michael's first three-peat, then you had Shaq coming into the game in about 94, 95, and the Orlando Magic getting better with Horace Grant moving to them as well. And then, of course, the rise of the Indiana Pacers as well. So there's so many teams in the East alone that really came through and made a huge impact on the NBA, and every game was tough for Michael Jordan. And we were going back in a couple of episodes ago, and I was saying that maybe he was pathologically competitive. But you have to look at a guy who's playing 82 games in the regular season for 14 years. He's playing playoff games for about 10 of those seasons as well. So he's playing 100, 110 games every season. And sometimes you perhaps need to have a little bit of added motivation. You have to say, okay, this is personal for me. This game is personal. I'm going to now, I've got a mini battle that I need to win. That's where I'm going to come out and do this. And he managed to do every single one of those things. So as far as the debate is concerned, I'm firmly in the MJ camp. I can see why some people are in the LeBron James camp, but I roll my eyes at those people. I can see why they're there, but I still roll my eyes at them. But the fact is that for me, unquestionably, Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player of all time. I also do think he's probably the greatest team sport athlete of all time as well. And I think this series showed you some of the insight as to why he might be that. I think there are a lot of players who may not be willing to go the distance, who may not be as willing to sour relationships, who may not have the backing of the establishment as Michael Jordan did in order to stay at that level for as long as he did. And let's make no bones about it. Michael was quite happy to use his influence. Michael was quite happy to use the power that he had to do some dubious things. I mean, there's no doubt that Michael Jordan and perhaps the rest of them said, I'm only going to the Olympics if Isaiah doesn't come. I'm pretty sure, not just him, but maybe others said it as well, but I'm pretty sure he said it also. And look at the whole Tony Kukoc episode. Tony Kukoc was just a guy peacefully minding his own business in Croatia, playing basketball. Jerry Krause thought was a good player, and just to spite Jerry Krause, they went and completely, annihilated Tony Kukoc in that game. But as Estelle was saying, I think it's important to remember also that we've had some really interesting partnerships in the NBA. We had Magic and Kareem in their heyday as well, and then we had Joe Dumars, Isaiah Thomas, that combination, and then of course more recently we've had Kyrie Irving and LeBron James also, and then after that or before that we had Anthony Hardaway and Shaq. Just after that we had Kobe and Shaq. But I think in terms of all those combinations, I still think Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan is still streets ahead of all of those guys. So for me, in terms of whether he's the best player and whether that's the best combination, I think absolutely yes.
Well, it's Tahira's chance to have a crack at the question, but for your opinion, I'm going to just throw in a point. There's a controversy that the document series is one-sided. It only explores Michael Jordan's anger, and he, justifies all his mistakes and makes him a very great basketball player who was always motivated by his mistakes. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. I think the documentary is pretty complimentary to Michael Jordan, and I think that all the stuff that has come out there is stuff that Jordan would have wanted to say to the world. There were all sorts of controversies that sprung up during his career, and this has given him an opportunity to say his side of the story without somebody else, being able to get over that and get that last word in which the last word is what Michael always wanted. And it's interesting to see his progression as well, because once his father died, he always needed to have that father figure grounding him, and it was important for him in terms of his personality as well. So I think that was an important thing that I got from this documentary. But in terms of reading the Jordan rules and watching The Last Dance, I would have much preferred to have the Jordan rules made into a documentary rather than this be the only thing that we're left with. I think it's a very important advert for the NBA as well, which is what I said earlier about Steve Kerr. And it's important that you see a lot of sporting bodies using this method to try and get viewers back to the sport, especially like Formula One, which had got quite boring, quite uncompetitive. They've done this whole documentary series as well, and I think that's going to bring the interest back into the NBA as well, just like it will do to Formula One.
Well, indeed, good points, Shanaka. Tahira, moving on to you. Same question and same debate. Was the documentary one-sided? Your thoughts on that? And then is Michael Jordan the greatest player of all time?
So I'll start off with the series being a little one-sided. So given how we were quite young at the time that Michael Jordan was playing in the NBA, prior to this series coming up, we had a very, let's say, molded image of how Michael Jordan was the greatest player of all time, with a perfect record, discipline on and off the court. But this documentary also did go into detail in terms of his character. We may have either changed or questioned our view of him to an extent. But at the same time, we also heard so much of insight about his character from his teammates, also his friends, family members, and all of that, which may have been either positive or negative. And also he did justify all the reasons behind his decisions and actions over time. But then again, the series also brings about the rivalries which Jordan did have. And most of them, whatever that was addressed in the series, yes, was we were kind of shown both sides of the story, which kind of, yes, gave us a bit of closure on both ends. But to an extent, I would say it may have been a little one-sided. Then again, it did shed some light in terms of his. They could have shed some light in terms of how his family did see certain things, because we mostly heard from his mom, but his kids had very limited, let's say, things to say, or let's say appearances in the series. So in general, it may have been a little one-sided, I feel, because we mostly saw Michael Jordan's perspective of things. Moving on to him being the greatest player of all time, this documentary did remind us of how and why Jordan rose so high and kind of also loomed so large over the NBA, and not only the NBA but also over the over sport, and also American culture. And then Jordan did have everything going on for him, and but one thing that stood out was his originality, because most of the players in the NBA kind of learned a lot from him, and also came this far. For example, I would say Kobe Bryant admits to having learned a lot from Michael Jordan. And addressing the fact that Shanaka brought up, where some people do think LeBron James is the best player of all time, which I do not agree with. In this case, I would say the newer generation might think so, given how they are more exposed to LeBron James than Michael Jordan up until this series, and also given all the highlights that are available on the internet of how he did contribute immensely to the Chicago Bulls winning. But the Bulls did not only win because they were better, but they also won because of his collective will, which did turn them over in the long run compared to when they started. Also, it did turn them into some kind of winning machine, which made them immune to the normal conditions of game logic. So I would like to bring the example of how in the last game where Utah's patented play, as Michael calls it, where Malone noticed Malone did get into an under the basket situation where Malone used to be constantly with Rodman, and that same play kept kept being played over and over again before, and then Michael Jordan kind of noticed that and reacted accordingly at that given point of time, and it was such a game changer. Also, the other thing we can take out of this is his ability to be in the present. That is honestly something that us as sportsmen and women, also most athletes around the world, find a little difficult to deal with, because regardless of the circumstances, in Michael Jordan's case, he had so much pressure from the media, his fans, his teammates, all of that, the expectation that came about. Regardless of him being one of the greatest players, he was still able to keep his mind on track and still pull through. Also, what we can take out of this is he did whatever he wanted. He also let the world think whatever they wanted and all of that, and he did his own thing, and that is very, very inspiring for us as well throughout our generation. And at the end of episode 10, as Phil Jackson says, he never gave up. He always delivered. He may have also over-delivered, but whatever that was asked of him, he did give it his all. And regardless of the circumstances of being sick, and also whether or not, like most of the players that he relied on in the team, either I'm referring to Scottie Pippen's having an injury in that last game, still Michael Jordan had to pick it all up and kind of save up all of his energy and give it his all throughout. So the list could go on, but I think I've reasoned out whatever that makes me feel like he's the greatest player of all time. And yeah.
Well, another interesting opinion from that. Then now let's move on to Estelle to see what she has to tell on the fact whether Michael Jordan is the greatest player of all time, and an overall debate about the document series. But one thing that I would want you to touch on is, Estelle, that I recall what Michael said in the first episode. There is a little press conference where he goes on to say that Cubs are rebuilding still, when he was questioned about dismantling the team after the 98 championship. And the truth is, Chicago Bulls are also rebuilding after that, and they've not really gone on to make a real mark in the NBA. So perhaps the question remains: Jerry was the greatest general manager of all time to have put together those teams, and after him, there's no such personality to find a winning combination to go on to win a match. So that's a question that remains unanswered, and that's a question that's also up for debate whether due credit should be given to Jerry. So I would like you to start off from that and move on to your opinion as to whether Michael Jordan is the greatest player of all time.
I don't think I'm in a position to tell you that he was the greatest general manager of all time, but I do firmly believe that his impact is as great as maybe Phil Jackson or Michael Jordan, in that ultimately, right, you can be a fantastic player, but we've seen through this documentary that Michael couldn't have done that alone, Phil couldn't have done that alone. So putting that team together, putting those players together, it was Jerry who did it, right? Like that's ultimately that's the truth. So if you look at players like Rodman, I think Pippen has said initially that he wasn't too much in favor of having someone like Dennis Rodman in the team, and who coach, who we all know, we saw how Michael and Pippen treated him. So guys like that were brought into the setup through Jerry's effort. So I think, I don't know if you can say he's the greatest general manager of all time, but certainly I think he has a huge, he needs to take a huge part of the credit for what that team was at the end of the day. And coming back to the big controversial question, I was just having a bit of a smile on my face when Tahira was talking about younger generations maybe considering LeBron a better player. I don't know how many friends I'm going to lose over this, but I think, to be honest, I'm a bit on the fence about LeBron and Michael, and I don't think any of us can really be objective about it. Like, I mean, even Shanaka mentioned it, like, as a kid, you grow up watching that, right? You grow up watching this man who is larger than life. He's not just a basketball player, right? He's everything. He can do anything. It seems as if he can just build his team to win. And sometimes it's a little difficult to see beyond that. But again, to reiterate what Shanaka said, the only comparison I see that kind of stands is LeBron. And I love watching LeBron James play. Like, I think he's a phenomenal athlete. It's almost what he can do on the court it's almost superhuman. So and coming back to, I think a lot of the debate is, Michael has 6 championships, LeBron has 3, and Michael's championships came where, 2 three-peats, so that's no mean feat, right? Winning 3 consecutively twice, that's no mean feat. Whereas LeBron has had, I think, 2 titles with the Heat and 1 with the Cavaliers. So, we've heard a lot about Michael. So, if I touch on LeBron, I would say the fact that he has managed it without a player like Scottie Pippen shows that he is a pretty phenomenal player. And also that now he's at Lakers. If he can potentially build a championship team there, then I think this conversation probably might need to be relooked at, because 3 franchises, it's no mean feat. And I think the Cavaliers won after many years, right? So my opinion, greatest of all time, I would say I'm on the fence, but leaning towards Michael for one reason. Is that he won 3 and then he was out of the game. He was completely out of the game. He was playing a different sport for 1.5 years. he comes back and then immediately wins 3 in a row again. So that is maybe where I give him the edge. But who knows, if LeBron can pull off a championship at a third franchise, then I don't know. Like, it's I don't think it's a debate that can ever be settled. And I mean, like you mentioned about the rebuilding, I think the Bulls, we don't know. Maybe if they'd stayed together, they could have won one, they could have won two. I think Scottie Pippen and Rodman reckon they could have won 2 more. We don't know, right? That didn't happen. And then a couple of years later, I think it was Shaq and Kobe dominating. So coming back to the rebuilding phase, I think the Bulls never really were able to acquire that kind of superstar players after that. The only chance they had was, I think, maybe 2008, 2009, they had Derrick Rose, who again I think could have been one of the all-time greats. He was a fantastic player, but that wasn't meant to be. I mean, injuries and the team surrounding him just wasn't there. So, so debate on the greatest of all time continues. I don't see it settling anytime soon on that topic.
Well, she does say that it continues, but she says that she's leaning towards MJ. So Michael Jordan is the greatest player of all time. I don't know. That's what our guests say. So if you're watching this right now and if you have a different opinion, you can catch them and not me, because that's their opinion. Well, let's move on to the most interesting part and rather the final segment of the review, the 3 favorite quotes of these 2 episodes. We've selected the quotes in a way where we can also look back at the document series as a whole and discuss what it says. We'll move on to the first quote. You can see the quotes as we discussed. Now, this particular quote was said by Michael Jordan. I'll move on to Shanaka with the quote. The quote is maddening because I felt like we could have just have a championship. Now, that's the quote he says when he's questioned about, was it the right time to retire? I would like to draw Shanaka's opinion from where Estelle left off, and my question to Estelle as well. Bulls have been rebuilding since that time, and Michael Jordan also says, it's maddening because he felt that he could have won the 7th championship. Your thoughts on this, Shanaka?
Well, he was in his mid-30s at that time, Lelung, so I'm not sure that there was a lot more games in him. I'm sure there was part of his will that got him over the line, not just his body. And there were players that were catching up to him. Guys like Kobe were on the block at that time, and they were only going to get better. Reggie Miller was only going to get better. Penny Hardaway, who was playing with the Magic, was going to get better. So I think the Bulls had probably reached their peak. Whether they had one in them when they were on their way down is something that we have to consider. But all those athletes, especially athletes like Michael Jordan, they always think one more. And you could see that, he's a gambler by nature, okay? He's a guy who would throw craps with his security guards just before the game. So it is in his nature to gamble. And when you gamble, you always think, okay, next one I'm going to get lucky again. Next one, okay, I didn't get lucky that time, I'm going to get lucky again. And so that was part of his psyche. So obviously he's going to say, yeah, sure, we could have won a 7th. But I'm not sure that was the case, because I think Indiana would have had them the next time they tried in the Eastern Conference Finals as well. I think where they really were better was Rick Smits with a 7'4", really proficient ball player, and with Reggie Miller as well. I think they would have really made a huge dent in that Chicago Bulls playoff run. But again, it's a crystal ball. We'll never know. Is it maddening? Yes, possibly it was that Jerry Krause said what he said at the start of the season instead of perhaps waiting and seeing what happened. You almost get a sense like they won that title just to prove Jerry wrong almost. But it was something that perhaps didn't need to be said. It could have been something that was discussed in the boardroom, and then after they won, perhaps maybe reassessed. But I don't think Jerry Krause would have been doing anything that Jerry Reinsdorf told him not to do. I think it would be naive of us to think that Jerry Krause was running that show without Reinsdorf actually being being the guy who called the shots. So you have to be understanding also of the economics of it, because apart from Michael Jordan, who was obviously getting all these endorsement contracts and was the highest paid athlete in the world at that time, the rest of the guys, including Scottie Pippen, were not paid a lot of money. You look at the other superstar players. Dennis Rodman was somebody who really fit the Chicago Bulls at the time. Whether he would have got the same kind of money or prominence if he was playing in another franchise, I don't know. And I think Dennis would have known that as well. And guys like Luke Longley are pretty journeyman players. You know, those guys are not superstars. If you ask anybody outside of basketball in that era, they probably wouldn't know who guys like Luke Longley or John Paxson were. So Jerry Reinsdorf and Jerry Krause managed to win 6 NBA championships pretty much on the cheap. And they knew probably that if those year-long contracts were to expire and they would have had to expend a lot of money to win a 7th championship, perhaps they would have thought, hey, it's not worth the money. We're the greatest franchise in the NBA right now. And that's likely to continue. And I don't think even the Lakers of Kobe and Shaq, or these current Golden State Warriors who are on their way down probably now, will ever kind of challenge that status. And we'll have to wait for a new franchise to come along to challenge that in many years' time.
Well, the second quote was said by Michael Jordan to Reggie Miller. Now, he goes on to say, "Don't ever trash talk to Black Jesus." Now, this killer instinct and where Michael finds motivation to perform at the highest level is discussed throughout the entire documentary on different aspects where he gains his motivation to perform. Tahira, your thoughts on the quote and your thoughts on the entire document series as to how he finds his motivation to perform at the highest level.
Well, the fact that he referred to himself as Black Jesus kind of implies how confident and cocky he was. And also, in previous episodes where trash talking is concerned, we always heard from his teammates how they kind of told Michael Jordan how he was more of a trash talker, and they weren't entirely fond of it, and the impact it had on other players. But then this episode ideally brought about how it worked the other way. So Michael Jordan, it starts off with how Reggie Miller went on to kind of question Michael Jordan, his playing, especially in the game where Reggie Miller had scored 10 in the first half and Michael Jordan had only scored 2, and then he went on to make a statement to Michael Jordan, which in the end did kind of motivate Michael Jordan to outperform. What we can gather out of that trash talking is concerned is the fact that whenever someone had to say something to Michael Jordan, he would not ideally let it get to him, but instead he would just, let his performance on the court do the talking. Throughout the series, how this ideally gave us an idea of the impact it had on him in terms of the games was when the media aimed at Michael Jordan, also this the kind of on paper as well as on the news, which in the end made them silent throughout. Also, in terms of how Brian Russell had challenged him while he was playing baseball, saying that, okay, I can maybe guard you, I can easily guard you, things like that. And he also revealed that he had a list of players who trash talked him, and he kept adding them to the list and making things personal. It's quite let's say it was a bit inspiring as well as a little hilarious as to how he made it kind of and he made it unexpected to the person or the party that kind of said things to him, in terms of how he responded to it. And it's quite I would use the word inspiring again, since he did let all of his performance on the court do the talking, be it either maybe the way he scored extremely well, or be it how he attacked them defensively on the court, things like that. In terms of players, this is. And throughout, regardless of whether they had anything negative or positive to say, Michael just proved them wrong by outperforming throughout. And regardless of the circumstances as well. And even when, let's say, the Karl Malone winning MVP, this is not ideally trash talking, but things like that ideally got to Michael Jordan, and he never disappointed.
Well, the final quote, and with that, we'll move on to Estelle. I would want a different angle on this with the trade that joins, considering the sports journalism trade join as well. Now, this quote was told by Reggie Miller while he was interviewed about the Eastern Conference Finals run that they had with Michael Jordan. He goes on to say, "We had the better team. I really do believe that. But championship DNA and championship experience really rose to the forefront in Game 7 for Chicago." Now, this is a very important thing that he says: championship DNA and championship experience, and on how a certain team knows to win it at the end. As you can practice for so long, you can do all what you know, but you also need to know how to win it. Estelle, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's kind of debatable to me whether they were the better team. I think Reggie at that time probably did believe that they had the better team. But I mean, we've heard this before, right? Knowing how to win. And I think you have to understand the type of pressure these players are under. Like, for example, we saw Michael's kids weren't allowed to come to that game because the crowds were that hostile. And in a basketball arena, you guys know, it's just a little, like, people are literally a couple of feet away from you. The crowd is literally a couple of feet away from you. So, and hurling abuse and I don't know, so that kind of pressure is not normal, right? So you need to be one step ahead. You can't be an average person and not let that get to you. So I think Reggie's comment there is really important in understanding that, look, these guys, the Bulls, basically six titles in 8 years, right? They've pretty much got the core of the team throughout those 8 years. Apart, like, I mean, if you think about it, their two main cogs were MJ and Scottie, plus the coach Phil Jackson. So that those vital parts of the team were still together throughout those 8 years. So winning then becomes, I would say, easier in a way for them because it's not something they haven't faced before. And Reggie Miller is a Hall of Famer, right? But no championship titles. He hasn't won a single championship as far as I know. Correct me if I'm wrong, but hasn't won a championship title, and I believe this was the only finals they got into. I'm not 100% on that. So Michael, Scottie, Phil, Dennis, they had all been in finals before. Steve Kerr, they had all been in finals before. They had all faced hostile crowds before. They've all faced this unreal amount of attention on themselves before. So I think that's where it comes to, how strong is your mental game? How strong are you in handling that pressure? So I think that's one place where I think really Reggie's comment resonates because they had that. They knew how to win games. They knew how to play crunch situations. They weren't flustered. They knew what to do. So yeah, so I would say I do agree with him on the championship DNA comment because it's not just talent, it's not just practice that wins you. You may win your game, it's not going to win you championships.
Well, there you go. That is our take and our attempt on try to look back at the entire document series as a whole, and of course throw in a new angle to whether Michael Jordan is the greatest player of all time. We can remind you again to watch the first, second, third, and the fourth episodes of our review on YouTube. It's uploaded on our YouTube channel and on our website and our Facebook page as well. So if you did miss it, if you couldn't catch it up live, you can always go out there and watch it. Just a little thought for everybody to ponder over before shining out in terms of Michael Jordan. Commissioner David Stern goes on to say at the end of the sixth championship they won, NBA was available in somewhere around 90 odd countries before that, but by the time Michael Jordan wins the sixth championship, it's available in 200 plus countries. That's without social media, that's without all the new technology we have, and that's Michael Jordan after leaving the sport for over 1.5 years, coming back, repeating the same performance once again. That does not mean that I'm saying he's the greatest player of all time, but it's up to debate, and y'all can decide it, and y'all can comment and let us know what you guys think as well. Thank you very much, Tahira Kotilan, Estelle Vasudevan, and Shanaka Marasinghe for joining with us in the season finale to discuss the 9th and the 10th episode of The Last Dance. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we will conclude our last dance of The Last Dance, and with the hope of seeing you once again with a very interesting series of reviews about the basketball movies and the other series that's out there. We will see you, because there's lots. There's Coach Carter, there's a documentary about Vince, then there's also a documentary about Allen Iverson as well. So hopefully we will get some time to debate about these documentaries and have a different angle opening up. Once again, reminding you, you can watch the missed episodes on YouTube, and thanking the guests for joining with us today. We'll take your leave. This is ThePapare.com, Sri Lanka's #1 sports hub. And until we meet you once again, take care and be safe.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this, and don't forget to hit the bell icon for our latest content.